Frank never believed in ghosts. At least not in the kind that could walk right in front of you, lock eyes, and smile as if they had never left this world. But one evening, on a quiet back road as the sun sank low behind the horizon, Frank swore he saw something no one could explain. It wasn't just anyone, it was his own employee, a man who had died just days earlier. This is a true story. It all began during the holidays, a season that always tested Frank's patience as a government sector manager. Requests for time off would flood in, and year after year, he had to be the one to deny most of them. Policy was policy. This was the busiest season, and staff shortages could paralyze operations. People rarely got exceptions. But then there was Rob. Rob wasn't the type of employee who stood out in either good or bad ways. He showed up, did his job, kept to himself. He wasn't the kind to stir trouble or ask for special treatment. So when Rob came into Frank's office one afternoon with a request for a few days off, on short notice no less, Frank's instinct was to deny it. That was the rule. Yet something inside Frank shifted in that moment. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the look on Rob's face, tired but hopeful. Maybe it was the weight in his voice, even though Rob never explained the reason for the time off. Whatever it was, Frank felt compelled to grant it. Against all logic, against company policy, he simply nodded and told Rob, "Take the time you need." Rob was grateful, more grateful than seemed normal. He thanked Frank more than once, almost like Frank had done him the biggest favor of his life. Frank thought little of it. People appreciate time off. Nothing unusual there. But then the days passed. Rob was supposed to return to work after the holiday break. He didn't. Frank called him, emailed him, left messages. No response. At first, Frank assumed maybe Rob had gotten stuck traveling or something had come up. It wasn't until later that he learned the truth. Rob had gotten into his car the very next morning after being granted leave. He drove all the way to Las Vegas. For a couple of days, he was there, moving through the city's chaos and neon glow. And then, without warning, he ended his own life. Frank was blindsided. Everyone was. There had been no warning signs, no cries for help, no sudden changes in behavior. Rob had a family at home, a wife, children. And yet something deep inside him had led him to Las Vegas, to that tragic choice. For days, Frank wrestled with it. Had Rob planned this all along? If so, why bother asking for time off at all? Why go through the formality of requesting leave if he knew he would never return? It didn't add up. Rob could have simply vanished without explanation. But instead, he'd stood in Frank's office, asked for approval, and left with gratitude shining in his eyes. Did Rob go to Vegas to gamble and end up losing everything, pushing him over the edge? Was it a hidden illness? A battle with depression no one ever noticed? Frank had no answers. The guilt was overwhelming. The approval he had granted weighed heavily on him. He had broken policy for this man, almost as if fate had guided him to. And then that man was gone. But nothing could have prepared him for what came next. Just a few days after hearing about Rob's death, Frank was driving home from work. He had stopped by his babysitter's house to pick up his young son, and together they were headed back along a quiet side street. It was the kind of road people only used if they knew it existed. Tucked away, lined with sparse houses and stretches of open land. The sun was low, bleeding orange and gold across the sky, but there was still plenty of light. The evening was calm, quiet. Frank's son sat beside him in the single cab truck, fiddling with something in his small hands. That's when Frank noticed a man walking up ahead. He was on the side of the road, moving toward them. Odd. There weren't many houses nearby, and it wasn't the kind of road people strolled casually on. Frank's grip on the steering wheel tightened as he approached, eyes narrowing. As his truck rolled closer, the man turned his head, and Frank's world stopped. It was Rob. Not someone who resembled him. Not a trick of the fading daylight. No, this was Rob. The same face, the same build, the same eyes. And those eyes were looking directly at Frank. Even more chilling, Rob smiled. A small, knowing smile. Frank's heart pounded. His breath caught in his chest. For a split second, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. But it was undeniable. His employee, the man who had been buried days earlier, was right there on the roadside. The truck passed, and instinctively Frank's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Rob was still there, walking. His back turned now, moving away. Frank's hands trembled as he tightened his grip on the wheel. His son sat quietly, oblivious to the storm raging inside his father. But then Frank asked him, his voice unsteady, "Did you see that man?" "Yes," his son replied without hesitation. Frank's stomach dropped. His son had seen him too. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a trick of grief. Heart hammering, Frank made a decision. He slammed his foot on the gas, sped forward to the nearest cross street, and turned the truck around hard enough that the tires screeched. He raced back up the hill toward where he had seen Rob. His chest was tight, adrenaline surging, desperate to confirm what he already knew. But when he reached the spot, nothing. The road was empty, silent, no man, no figure, and there was nowhere he could have gone. No cars nearby, no houses close enough to disappear into. Rob was simply gone, vanished. Frank pulled over, scanning the fields, the ditches, everywhere his eyes could reach. But there was nothing, only the quiet of the evening pressing down on him. He sat in that truck, the reality sinking in. He had just seen Rob, and Rob had smiled. Why? Why appear to him? Why on that road with his son at his side? Why smile? Was it gratitude? A silent thank you for approving the time off, for giving him those final days of freedom? Or was it something else entirely, something darker? Frank couldn't shake the image. He drove that same route for years, always with a small part of him bracing for another glimpse. But it never came. Not once. That single encounter stood alone, burned forever into his memory. Frank became convinced of one thing. What he saw was no trick, no illusion, no shadow of grief. It was real. Rob had been there, and he had smiled at him. But the question that haunted Frank every single day was this: what did that smile mean? Was it peace? Gratitude? A farewell? Or was it something far more unsettling? Frank may never know, but he knows one thing with absolute certainty. What he saw that evening on the quiet side street was not a living man. It was his deceased employee, a ghost. And once you've seen something like that, you never forget it. That smile and the unknown meaning behind it haunts me to this day.